Hello and welcome to the 18th installment of the Major Arcana series. Today, as you might have guessed, we are doing the Star, which is maybe everyone's favorite card. I mean, who does not like the Star? It is pretty hard not to like the Star. And not just even because what it represents is so positive, but also I think this might be the most beautiful card in this particular deck. But there's something about the Star. Um, Now, I'm just going to get the nitty gritty over with this card at the get go. It's a sign of Aquarius, which is ruled by Saturn. It is oh, well, there's more nitty-gritty about this than I thought of at first. Because remember when we talked about the Emperor, we talked about how its path and its letter got switched with this card. So now this card occupies the path. So now we're backtracking quite a bit, back up the Tree of Life. And this is the last path that we didn't talk about that connects Chokhmah to Tiphareth, or number 2 to number 6. So it's quite an interesting concept, or switch around, I think. I'm not sure. See, I can buy the Emperor belonging on the path between Netzach and Yesod, but I have a slightly harder time buying the attribution of the Star connecting Chokhmah to Tiferet. But it can still make sense. It still does make sense. Um, it is the letter He, which means a window. But the important thing about the letter He is its connection to the name Tetragrammaton, or Yod He Vav He, Yehovah, whatever. I mean, of course, technically it's not pronounceable, but there are a number of ways that people think you're supposed to pronounce it. Yahweh is another. Um, so anywho, it is the letter He occurs twice in Tetragrammaton. It is the second letter and the fourth letter, and we say that it represents the first He, or the He primal, as I and many refer to it as, represents the Great Mother, whereas the He final represents her daughter, the princess. So, of course, these correspond to the tarot court cards, Knight, Queen, Prince as the Vav, and Princess as the He final. Um, but the interesting thing is that I guess the letter He is definitely a feminine letter from the esoteric standpoint. And I think that's one of the other supporting reasons for switching the letters of the Emperor and the Star, because as we talked about, a fish hook, or tzadi, makes more sense for the Emperor, whereas for the Star, which is a representation of the feminine archetype, fishhook doesn't quite cut it. Whereas window, or the idea of He being feminine from Tetragrammaton, the revolving formula, these make sense. Now, the other thing that is incredibly important about this card um, is just in its name, the Star, because we are told one of the big catchphrases of the Book of the Law is every man and every woman is a star. And it's like line 3. It comes right at the beginning of the book. It's one of the first things it says of any real, gravity. And it's a big one. It's a pretty big doozy. It is the idea that everyone is like a star. And now, this is sort of a confusing analogy because Crowley, when he explains it, says that it means that we essentially are aggregates of experience. That's what he really means in his writing when he refers to star. The idea is that the universe is, we've dabbled in a lot of general Crowleyan stuff to talk about these cards because you have to. Um, but the idea of that the Book of the Law basically gets at is that there are three overall principles. There is Nuit, which is what this card represents a form of. Nuit being the eternal mother, the idea of God as the all-encompassing unity of life, the non-existent, because it has not manifested yet, the non-existent sum total potential of the entire universe, the sum potential of all that is possible to be created. Now, the entire universe is based on probability. We know this. And we know that of course, physics, you often talk, or rather hear about physicists talking about, parallel dimensions and all that stuff. Of course, a lot of this is based on theory and conjecture, but there is some validity to it. I mean, even just, the fact that we cannot predict the exact location of an electron at any time, or rather, we do not know exactly. We can predict, we cannot know exactly. One of the basic tenets of quantum physics. But then the idea is that possibly that electron is phasing in and out of this present reality, and then where exactly is that electron going? And this, of course, applies to all electrons. So, the idea is that parts of you could be phasing in and out of existence without you even being aware of it. I mean, I don't know. This opens a huge can of worms that, of course, I am totally ill-equipped to talk about because I am not a physicist. I am a wannabe physicist only in the sense that I think it would be really cool. Otherwise, I have no scientific capacity. But I try to keep relatively up to date with what people are talking about and what people are discovering. But anywho, the idea of multiple potential realities occurring at once or being collapsed into one single reality. Um, this is one of the directions that physicists are going in trying to understand how the universe and how reality works. Um, and so Nuit really represents the sum total of all of that. It's why she's represented as zero or a circle. Um, it's why she's the mother, but she herself is not creative in that she does not have the power to manifest herself. She requires a complement. She requires the god Hadit. And Hadit is conceptualized as a winged globe, um, which is a really interesting symbol because, of course, the winged globe from Egyptian mythology, which is where all this is coming from, is usually a kind of solar disk, a solar symbol. And Hadit is really a synonym for Keter, really. When we're talking about Hadit, we're really just talking about the essence of what Keter is for the individual. It is a point, and that's all it really is. It is simply a point that can experience and therefore accumulate experience, and therefore it can change and grow, even though technically it will always be the same thing at its essential layer. But by aggregating experience to itself, it can be said to grow and change. And that the idea is that by growing and changing in this way, the universe perpetuates itself. Um, and it evolves. The consciousness of the universe evolves. Um, And it happens all the time, just by you and I and every living thing, coming to an understanding of things, by coming to an understanding of adaptation. Um, and this is, I mean, Thelema works very well with the general science or the general scientific ideas of our modern age, which makes it really compelling to me, anyway. I know a lot of people don't like it, and that's totally fair because there's some stuff that is obviously not exactly easy to swallow, so to speak. Um, but anywho, so you have those two polar opposites, and then from the union of those two, I suppose, you have the third god of the Book of the Law, which is the Lord of the Aeon, supposedly, Horus. And really, when we say Horus, what we mean is the essentially, if I like to try to bring in Christian stuff to this because it's usually more accessible to the average Westerner, just whether they practice it or not. It's just something that we're all usually generally familiar with. And of course, if you're not, that's okay too. But it's sort of very similar to the idea of Christ in glory coming again to judge the living and the dead. Um, it's essentially the Christ in judgment. And so Horus is a particularly aggressive and destructive god, and almost bloodthirsty and vengeful. But of course, now I'm just talking about General Thelema and not the star. But the point is, the star as a card um, is a symbol of that Nuit essence, and how the individual themselves is a microcosmic Nuit. The idea is, or at least the idea as I see it, is that we are each, and this goes back to the mother and the daughter thing. The mother is, well, what is the mother? I mean, the great mother, of course, is Nuit, but how do I want to say this? Um, the idea of just having two mothers really gets to the point that that we are basically just the universe in miniature is really all I'm trying to say. Um, and that, we are in some ways, um, our personalities and our beings are kind of like eggs. And sort of those eggs contain this unknown potential within them, um, that could be a full range of something. Um, and the idea is that the hadith, or the point of view from that, for that person or that egg, is what allows that sum total of experience for the individual, or potential experience for the individual, to play out in reality. It's sort of like the grand experiment, life or lives for a form of consciousness is all about trial and error, and about enjoyment and coming to a full realization of what selfhood really means. And so, in that sense, we are exactly like the universe, which as a whole is Nuit, this mass of chaotic, unlimited potential of stuff, of potential things and events that can happen or be made. Um, and it requires consciousness to actually make them into something and to manifest them and to experience them in order to learn from them, you know. Um, so we as microcosmic selves are very similar to Nuit, and that's why we are like stars, or are stars, not like stars. Um, but the other idea about being a star is that you have your own path of orbit that is unique to you, that is part of that, like, egg full potential of your being type of thing. It's sort of like, you know, sometimes I like to go back to medieval theory too. Aquinas talks about how, um, why it is that there are different people with different abilities, and he says that it's because when God crafts the soul of an individual, or did at the beginning or whatever, um, each soul is a different vessel and can contain only so much. And so God fills everyone with varying amounts of his essence. And so that explains why some people are more skillful than others in various things. This was the medieval theological 13th century interpretation of of that. Um, of course, it wasn't because someone was just smarter. It was because God filled them with more of His essence, with more of His spirit. And I think the idea is very similar here. The idea depicted in this card is, if you notice, the bowl or the cup from which she's pouring stuff out onto her is golden. And so gold being the sun, it is associated with God the Father. And so it is, in a way, like she is pouring the spiral energy or unlimited energy and force of God the Father upon herself, and becomes a conduit for that force to manifest itself in some kind of reality. Now, granted, that reality, because it's lunar, see, it's silver, a silver cup, because it's lunar, of course, it's going to be riddled with illusion. But the idea is still the same. And basically we have the two haze, or the two haze of tetragrammaton, that is, present in this card. The hay final, I would argue, is the manifested Nuit that we have as the forefigure. Whereas Nuit as a whole, the great mother Nuit, is represented by this big honking circle in the background. Um, the circle, of course, being an idea, a representation of Nuit, but kind of the idea again of that egg. That Crowley tells us that that circle is supposed to represent the sum total of creation, basically, the entire universe, and so that is Nuit. So we have both of them here, but the individual as Hay, as a hay final rather, acts as a conduit for the strength and zeal of God, the inspiration, the divine creative inspiration of God, to flow through her and manifest in reality. This is a card very similar to the Magus, but in a different way, because it's feminine. It is, we always say that the priestess is the feminine complement to the magus, but in some ways this is too, because it shows a very similar idea and it has a very similar energy to it. And I think that's why it is so optimistic. Both of them are very empowering. And the idea of this is that the entire universe also is love. We have the multiple seven-pointed stars, and seven is associated with Venus. And so in this card, we are combining the ideas of Nuit and Venus, the goddess Venus, and saying that the sum potential of the universe also, because, well, how do I want to say this? Um, well, the universe is love because the universe is made manifest by the meeting of one part of Nuit's body with one point of experience that can actually realize it. In other words, every single event, every single action, every single creature is the result of the meeting between one specific Hadith, or at least one Hadith, and the body of Nuit, which is available for everyone. Um, so, so essentially, the universe, we can say, uh, is in a constant state of orgasm, as I like to tell people, and that this is why it is also written in the Book of the Law that the universe is pure joy. Um, Not only because there is no deeper meaning to existence other than for the sake of existence itself and for the sake of enjoying existence, but also because, um, just based on the principles here we're talking about, you have the unification of the masculine and the feminine at all times. And so it really, you as a conduit, so to speak, for God's force, you as a, a vessel for that, you make manifest the body of God, essentially. I mean, the issue with Lema, I think, for many Westerners is that it, or the ideas espoused in the Book of the Law, um, is that it comes across as more polytheistic than I think it's meant to be. Obviously, the whole point of it is that every subjective hadith, every point of consciousness is a god, basically. But at the same time, I tend to see, I mean, it all kind of works in a way sort of similar to the Trinity in Christianity, how, three are actually one, which is the big conundrum of Western civilization, how three things can be, separate but equal in one, it's like, makes no sense. In my opinion, I think it makes absolutely no sense, and I don't think it's made sense to anyone for 2,000 years, which is one of the reasons, I'm sure, why Christianity isn't doing so hot. Um, well, or at least academic Christianity isn't doing so hot because it's too damn hard. It's too scattered. As beautiful as it is, it can be incredibly scattered sometimes, and it's very frustrating. Why three and one? It makes no sense. Um, I mean, I don't know. Well, what was I going to say about this? So, so the other interesting thing about this card is that being stars we have and being aggregates of experience, we have essentially veils of various protection that conceal our true divine form. That divine spark of Hadith within us is concealed by many layers. We're well-padded creatures, or beings rather, because of our experiences and because of our traumas too. Um, I think one of the big messages in the Book of the Law is about the defeat of egotism and the defeat of the weak self. And I think, when we read in that book about all the, slaying of enemies and all that, I think a lot of it is meant to be directed towards the personal foes that one has inside. Um, and those are the things that it's okay to stamp out. Um, the idea is that we want to, in order to function as well as possible with those around us and with the universe at large and with ourselves, creating the most health for ourselves, the best thing we can do is to essentially, reveal that starry presence within us to our fellow man or woman. Um, that is a major solution. I mean, I think a lot about Nietzsche, honestly. Friedrich Nietzsche, one of his big arguments was that man is no longer afraid of man. And that was partially why Nietzsche was such a proponent of violence sometimes, um, because he wanted to recreate one of the fundamental aspects of mankind that has been very much neglected for the past, well, I shouldn't say neglected entirely because people are always at war somewhere. But I think, particularly in Western culture, the fear of violence and the I guess the desire for such peace that no violence ever happens is unrealistic and not particularly in line with what the universe is all about, or what nature is all about. And I think that's a big aspect of the Book of the Law. Where was I going with this? Oh shoot. But the idea is that in order to function best, right. Um, so in other words, Nietzsche's whole thing is that we need to, in order to inspire man to do better, and in order to inspire man to be a healthy species, we have to instill some kind of almost fear in man about man. Man has to be in awe of himself again. And the idea that Nietzsche had is that man is very bored with himself in the present, or, well, Nietzsche, of course, is writing mid 19th century, but the idea of modern Western society as being, effeminate and not productive and sick because it was so weakened by its own philosophies um, and afraid of anything destructive, and so therefore it became kind of flaccid, for lack of a better word. Um, so it's I think the star is very along those lines of revealing the divine presence is a way of inspiring man. This is a card that represents that totally speaks to inspiration and divine inspiration, and that's why it's so beautiful to us. Um, and about revealing that, it's definitely about revealing that. I think. I mean, you can see the sun, the card, the sun, as meaning the same thing. Um, but for me, I tend to see the star as the revelation of it. It is the vision of endless possibilities, and it is the vision of man being the conduit for those endless possibilities. And that's why I think it's so associated with hope and optimism. Um, so there's a lot going on here. Of course, I have kind of rambled through this card as I have done all of them in perfect Prince of Cups 518 form. So nothing different here, no surprises. But that's about it. I mean, it is the sign of Aquarius. Um, the fact that it is ruled by Saturn does connect it to Binah, the mother on the Tree of Life, which is also very relevant. Um, and Aquarius, Aquarius is a sign all about the individual. Aquarius is the carob of man, and Aquarius is a sign associated with this kind of carefree, independent, kind of F you if you don't like me kind of attitude. And, the star is kind of like that. The star is an individualist and is unique and revels in its own uniqueness. Um, and the idea is that God's glory is manifested by the individual's uniqueness. And I think becomes even more interesting when we think about where our current society is, even if you just think pop culture. I mean, the big drive right now, which is very interesting for younger generations, is this whole self-acceptance thing, like, be who you are no matter what, and, love yourself and it's okay, and all these campaigns to make people feel better about themselves, um, in just a number of ways, even in our popular music, just everything in pop culture is trying to create this society of people that feel more comfortable in their own skins. Whether or not that's successful or not is totally up for debate. But that is the drive that seems to be behind a lot of this. And I look at stuff like that and I think about how much the idea of the new aeon is very relevant. It very much describes where we are going as a species, and how we think about ourselves in connection to God, and how we think about the universe. Um, and it's very much a process. It's an evolutionary process, and we're yet to see exactly where it goes. Um, but it will be exciting if we can trust Liber All at all. Um, right. So I don't believe I have anything else to say about that. I apologize. It was a little scattered in places. If you have any questions, comments, please leave them. I very much enjoyed some of the comments that you've been adding to these videos. Really cool, and really nice to get some feedback. Okay, so thank you very much, and I will see you next time for number 18. We're almost done. Yay! Number 18, the moon. Okay, bye.